Just watching a bedtime stories episode on the Bridgend suicides in South Wales in the late 2000s. Just a sort of disclaimer here. I'm not monetizing this video, so I've no interest in because of the sensitive subject nature. I'm not monetizing this. I don't want to get any profit from that and be accused of exploitation. But I think there are a number of talking points that are important around the subject that I think can apply to other places as well. So if you're not familiar with the case, basically Bridgend is a town and county borough in South Wales. South Wales was an industrial area with coal mining being an important industry, particularly in the past, especially in the past. The industries have now declined, as they have across much of the UK heavy industry. It's a similar story here in the northeast of England, where coal mining and shipbuilding were the two big industries. Um, and in the 80s and 90s, that changed with those industries in decline and the economic situation and government policy and so on all having a role to play in the changing landscape. Um, Now, with Bridgend, what happened was between roughly early 2007 and late 2009, there was a spate of young people hanged themselves. And what was unusual about this was that virtually all the suicides, 26 suicides for this particular period, were all the same method, all hanging. Um, and in no case was there a suicide note left. So, in that sense, it was seen as unusual. It's difficult to know what really happened at Bridgend in terms of why there was a higher than average level of suicide. On on the sort of surface, you could say, well, it's the deprivation. This is an area that had high unemployment. The town of Bridgend is about 39,000 people. The county borough is about 130,000. But the area had high unemployment. There weren't many prospects for young people, and there was also high prevalence of drug and alcohol abuse. So on the surface, you would think, okay, high rate of depression and mental health problems was a component of this, but if that was the case, then why is it that other towns and cities that also suffer comparable rates of deprivation and low opportunities didn't have a spate of suicides in the way that Bridgend had? I mean, I can think of any number of places that have similar reputations. Sunderland, for a start. Sunderland is often seen as quite a deprived city. Um, and this isn't to badmouth the city that I live in. Sunderland has many merits. We have a great civic museum. We have a beach which has Europe's largest air show. We had the Tall Ships event 2 years ago, which I thought was fantastic. But we also have a lot of betting shops, a lot of charity shops, and you have to just go into Sunderland city centre, and there is a depressing vibe about the place. I can't beat around the bush about that. There is. This city just doesn't have the sort of opportunities that other places do. And I think we will always be overshadowed by Newcastle upon Tyne. Someone actually asked me to make a video on my own situation with unemployment. I don't want to do that just yet. I may at some point, but it's just not something I want to talk about at this particular point. It's not something I want to censor, but just I need to be in the mood for it, and I want to go at that from a particular angle. So anyway, Sunderland's an example. Northwest England, Lancashire, towns like Preston and Blackburn and Blackpool aren't exactly known for being prosperous places. They have high rates of drug and alcohol problems. They've got youth unemployment. They have those sort of social problems. Parts of Scotland, the new towns around Glasgow aren't exactly known for being particularly happy places. Somewhere like Cumbernauld, Livingston, um, South Essex for that matter. You can find pockets around the UK. I'm sure there's places that I haven't named, parts of the West Midlands, the Black Country. They are not exactly the sort of places, like by contrast, you then look at places like certainly all the bigger cities would have more opportunities, and the cathedral cities, places like York and Chester and so on. But even there, you would find pockets of wealth poverty discrepancy. In fact, one of the worst examples in the country is Cambridge. Cambridge is known as a nice university city, but actually it has one of the biggest wealth poverty gaps apparently anywhere in the country. Um, so there's a real gulf between the university and the city. Um, in the case of Bridgend, I think a number of factors have been at play. Having looked into this, um, definitely the deprivation was one factor, but the strange thing is some of the young people who died were actually in situations where apparently they were getting opportunities. So, for example, one young man apparently had been training, he'd had a driving license. There was things that were looking up in his life. Um, Almost in every case, there was alcohol related issues, binge drinking. And a lot of the young people were known to the police, presumably for antisocial behaviour. So that may have been a component. But again, if that's the case, why is this not seen in other cities? Why is there not similar levels of suicides? I mean, this is 26 suicides over just 2 years. So it was a lot higher than either the national average or even the average in Bridgend. By comparison, in previous years, the rate was about 3 young men were dying per year in Bridgend. In this particular period, it was 9 a year. So clearly something was going wrong in that town. Um, and up to the year 2012, they recorded 79 young suicides, that is, between the ages of 13 and 41 in the period up to 2012, although that was for the whole county borough. One one factor that was pointed to was the irresponsible behaviour of the press, in that they almost glorified this or almost normalised it, and they were accused of. I mean, I haven't seen any documentaries or I haven't seen any interviews that were in question, but if they kind of spoke to young people who knew the victims in an insensitive or irresponsible way, they may have then, because the tragic thing was a lot of the people who died knew each other. So you'd have one young person would die, 2 weeks later their best friend would die, 3 weeks after that someone they knew. So it was like a trigger, a domino effect, and I think that's what made it particularly tragic. Um, and so I think irresponsible media coverage was a factor. It actually got to the point where the local police, I guess it would be South Glamorgan, or I'm not sure what the particular force there is, but they actually asked the media to stop reporting the suicides in order to not have galvanize that sort of effect. Now that must have had some positive impact because the rate has declined. In other words, the situation has improved. The number of suicides has decreased. Of course, every suicide's a tragedy in itself, but the decline is certainly something to be welcomed. I imagine Bridgend is a town that doesn't want to be associated with this. Um, but the reason I'm making this video is not to try and defame Bridgend. It's to sort of ask, well, there is deprivation in other parts of the country. There is depression. I mean, the leading cause of death for young men in the United Kingdom is suicide. That's appalling. It's just an appalling thing to consider. Um, I mean, one of the things that's often been brought up is, oh, just talk to someone. But in some ways, I think that's overly simplistic. Talking does help, but it's not the only thing. I mean, for example, if people are experiencing financial problems, simply saying I've got financial problems isn't necessarily going to solve the problem. There also needs to be a look at the root causes of, people need to know what is causing their depression. Um, in many cases, I think financial issues is going to be one of the leading causes. Um, Relationship problems is another one. Insecurities. One of the things with Bridgend is it was pointed out that there was a large number of telephone masts nearby, and this may have been having some effect. But I'm not sure if that would be the case without knowing the science of it. In big cities, there's far more telecommunications in a close vicinity. So why do we not hear about people in offices getting, suicide trends going on. It may be that there was some sort of suicide pact among the friends. The fact that there was an absence of suicide notes is a bit suspicious. At one point, they even spoke about the possibility a serial killer was on the loose, which was definitely, ridiculous because of the nature of the deaths. It's very sad what happened there. But I also think that if Bridgend is making improvements, it should be allowed to do that. And anything positive that's happening in the town and the county needs to be welcomed. Because actually, I think sometimes talking about deprivation, sometimes talking about the social problems that an area experiences can actually galvanize those problems. That's why, whilst I say Sunderland has problems, it does. I don't like the abundance of betting shops we have here. We also have a rough sleeping problem, like a lot of places. And sometimes, quite honestly, I go into Sunderland city centre and I do feel quite depressed looking around. Um, Particularly Blandford Street. If you know Sunderland, you'll know what I'm talking about. But I think where we have positive things, they should be spoken about and they should be welcomed. I mean, the Tall Chips event here was great. It was a free event. We had the Tall Chips, a world-renowned race with old-fashioned sailing chips. I mean, that was a great event. It looked great. Sunderland has Europe's biggest air show. In my opinion, we have one of the best civic museums. So what I'm saying is civic pride is an important thing. And wherever there is some cause to, I think that the media has a responsibility also to kind of give a positive message, not just a negative message. So in the case of Bridgend, the negative coverage of what's happening here, all these young people are taking their lives, may have actually had a detrimental effect. One theory that the guys from Bedtime Stories put forward was that it may have actually put this sense that, well, if these young people are kind of getting venerated with vigils and so on when they die, maybe I'm better off dead than living. It's a tragic thing to consider, but that may have been one component. Anyway, if you're from Bridgend, please don't misunderstand this. I'm not trying to defame your town. I'm just saying that there are similar issues across the country, and this can apply to Sunderland, to Dudley, to Cumbernauld in Northern Ireland. There's a town called Ballymena, where my mother's side of my family came from. That town is notorious in Northern Ireland for drug problems, as well as sectarianism. Blyth in Northumberland. There's any number of places in the UK that have reputations, I would say, just as bad as Bridgend for deprivation. So I think this perpetual blacklist thing is not good. It's a bit like university league tables. Universities that are at the bottom of the list, it doesn't necessarily mean they're bad universities. It just means that they haven't had the time that Oxford and Cambridge and the red brick universities have had to grow. So that could be one issue. I think constantly maybe categorizing towns and universities and league tables or in like best to worst lists is can potentially be damaging because it puts a false sort of focus. I mean, I guess you could say if it's shamed to towns at the bottom to improve, or that that may galvanize them to improve their image, but I'm not sure if it's entirely a good thing because I actually think that the if young people are constantly hearing their town is a shithole, to put it bluntly, that's bound to have some sort of effect on their mental health. It's bound to have some sort of trigger effect. Um, in terms of how they approach that because that's not providing optimism, that's not providing hope. Even if it's technically true that a particular place does have real problems, I think that you need to allow for where improvements do happen, they need to be welcomed. So Bridgend has made improvements. There were concerted efforts by the authorities in the town, by the police, by the NHS, even by the clergy, to try and come together and get some sort of solution to this. And it may have paid off, but every death was a tragedy, and my heart goes out for any family who loses a young person in those circumstances. It's to find your son or daughter like that would be horrendous. I mean, any suicide's tragic, but particularly young people, these are teenagers that had the rest of their lives ahead. That was particularly sad. Let me know your thoughts. I'll conclude by saying, of course, unemployment, deprivation are issues, but you also get social problems in areas that are wealthier. I mean, the city of Bristol is not a particularly poor city, yet it has plenty of antisocial problems. So it's not always straight cut that wealthy places are fine and poor places have crime and deprivation. Some of Britain's most illustrious cities have their share of social problems too. You have rough housing estates in Oxford. So it's not quite black and white, and I think that where there is optimism, that needs to be promoted. I mean, where there is good things, need to be promoted as well.